Wisdom, a house is built. By understanding, it is established, and by knowledge, the rooms are filled with all pleasant and precious riches. Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4. Hello, ladies. Welcome to Homemaking Radio. I hope that you get a lot done while you listen today. I'm Mrs. Sherman, and I have a blog for which I am making these videos. Therefore, I don't have any interaction on YouTube, and there are no comments here, but you can go over to my blog where I have embedded it, and you can listen there and post a comment if you like and get to know me and what else I represent. The purpose for these videos is to give you something to listen to where you don't have to watch everything. I do have a couple of things to show you, but it'll give you some listening time while you clean a room or while you do something, load something, unload something, clean something out. And as I say that, I'm looking over at a couple of things that need to be cleaned out. I'm very well embedded here. And so I want to say that this is my opinion, and I am doing this under my freedom of speech, which every American has, and it's my own observation. It's based on my own observation and my own experience. It won't all work for you. Everybody's home is different. Everybody's family is different. They're all different personalities, have different needs, and you'll be serving your home in a different way. But what I'd like to do is just touch on the basics that everybody has to face every day and show how I have gotten through it or how I have heard of things that have been helpful. And if this is not helpful to you, there are so many other, there's housewife radios and there's different things on the YouTube that deal with homemaking that you can go and listen to or watch. This is just basically for listening, and it might not be for you. It's also very long, because if I'm going to go to the trouble of getting it all set up, I'm not going to sit here for 4 minutes. So I want to probably tell you more than just that amount of time. I'd like you to be able to get something done. And I always appreciate getting an email or a post, comment, telling me what all you did. It's so interesting what all you can get done. And I started this because I needed something to listen to when I was cleaning a bedroom, but everything had to be watched. And I love homemaking videos where I watch how people clean their home or decorate it, but you still have to stop and watch. And so I wanted to make something that you could hear. And before you go and go about your business, I have something to show you, and that's my teacup for the day. And this is so interesting. Do you know what that flower is? It's called Love in a Mist. And this is a brand called Royal. And it's from London, but there's no other markings on it. It doesn't tell what it is, but I knew what that flower was, and it was a gift to me, I believe, from one of my children, and from an antique store. You can kind of tell when something is an antique because the handles are quite tiny. Anyway, I just happened to be growing Love in a Mist out there, and it's just this perfect flower. These Love in a Mist are very interesting flowers. They grow like the one behind me, very bushy. They kind of look like dill, and have these wispy little leaves like dill, but the flowers are not always the same. On one bush, probably the same, but then on another bush from the same seed packet, you'll find a different shape of petals, a different amount of petals, different color, slightly blue. And I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of the fact that I got these growing outside, and they spread. They stay there year after year. You don't have to replant them, and they just keep spreading. And at first, when they first come up, you might think it's a weed. Kind of looks like horsetail, but it's not. I don't know what they call that today. It was a weed that we were invaded with years ago in the northern climates, but I really like this. I will put a picture of it on my blog for you. And I also have something to read to you. I think there's a bee in the house. Can you hear it? And so I'm going to read you something that's very interesting beyond, you don't have to stay here to look at it. There's nothing to see, so you can keep working if you like. Now, we usually start out with your appearance at home. And if you have to get up in the morning and ask yourself, shall I get dressed or when shall I get dressed, then you're not really convinced that your appearance is, you're not on automatic as far as your appearance goes. And I have heard of people who were in captivity of some kind that still bathed and dressed and behaved in a dignified way, that the dress actually adds to the mental image you have of yourself of being a dignified person. And so I really encourage you not to dress as though you were in captivity. Now, I'm not talking about the current situation in 2020, but any homemaker over the decades has gone through a phase where she felt, I remember back in the 1950s, we didn't have cars. Women didn't have their own cars. And they'd have to take their husband to work, and then they would use the family car during the day. And the days that he would take it to work meant that she would not be going anywhere. And so you had a feeling of captivity, and you learned to fill up your time a certain way and adjust to it. But I would suggest that you not dress as though you were in captivity, no matter what the situation is, just being a homemaker or the current situation. Dress as though you are in charge of a great enterprise that you're going to continue generationally. Because, like Emily Barnes said, we are not just teaching one generation, we are teaching several generations. The way we live as homemakers, the way we live as wives and mothers, or even people who have to live alone, the way you live is going to have an effect on future generations because of the image they have in their mind of seeing you. And so, personally, I have the impression from Scripture that God doesn't want His people to be what they call non persona grata, which I hope I pronounced that right, and it means not recognized. And because we have a purpose here. And the easiest step in being recognized and I know a lot of us, we're shy and we don't want to be recognized. We would rather people ignore us. and that goes for me too. Sometimes I'd like to get something done and not have anyone expect anything of me, and just kind of not think I'm there, and I can get busy and concentrate on my work. And the easiest step of having this purpose in your life is your appearance. It's just the easiest thing, and sometimes all I get done is get dressed, because one thing after another happens in my home, or I'm expected to be somewhere, and that's all. At least I got dressed. And I always think that. I always think, well, at least I got dressed. On a day that one member of my family got sick and I had to drive them to the hospital, I thought, at least I got dressed. I didn't have to spend another half an hour in the bathroom or just a quick getting ready. I felt less distracted and more in control of the situation, a lot calmer, because I was dressed when I had to drive this person to the hospital. And so this is something, this appearance thing, when we get started with homemaking, the day begins with your appearance. And one of the reasons is because it's something that no one can interfere with. It's something that no one can stop. They can't get in the bathroom with you and say, okay, fix your hair this way, or wear this, or dress this way. This is all your own idea, and it is also your own effort. And it is one of the easiest ways to change things in your life. You can't change everybody else. You can't change, sometimes you can't even change things in your home, but you can change your appearance. And I still remember in the olden days when ladies feeling a little discouraged or even depressed go wash their hair, or the wealthier ones would get a new hat, and it changed things. And I still remember when clothing was a high quality, and here in the USA was made in USA. You could not find anything made anywhere else. It was made in USA, and the feeling you got when you wore it was one of quality. It just made you feel different. It made you stand up straighter. And some of you who are my age or older might remember that. But these days you can buy something and it feels good the first day you wear it, and after that it's not as it just doesn't have an effect. But clothing is designed, it should be designed to have an effect on your mood and your personality, whether it's the color or the texture. And this is one thing that you can control in your home. And so at least I'm sure it's very amusing to people who are make a hobby and a business of mocking me, that I'm sure it's very amusing for them to say, oh, well, at least she was dressed for it. But I have read about that too in old novels, and it was a very important thing. Your speaking, your conversation and your message can be stifled, but the way that you dress can't be stifled. You can be seen. And I'm not suggesting that in any way we become show-offs, but it is a statement that you can make without opening your mouth. People aren't very receptive to our message as Christians or as homemakers or even the homeschoolers that are around. People aren't very receptive to it, but they see how you look and they judge that, and that is a message. They'll say something like, well, I've noticed the homemaker, she has an aura about her. Most homemakers are friendly. I've even heard people who serve people in the public to say that they enjoy the homemakers coming in the morning because they're always polite and not so upset, nervous, and demanding. And so that's the thing. Start with your appearance because it does send a message. Your appearance can be calming or it can be jarring. Now, one thing that I wanted to say is that some people, the appearance is also very forthright. It's not something you have to figure out. It's not something hidden. Someone else can see you and be cheered by it, be uplifted by it. And I can remember in the olden days when the young men enjoyed seeing their sisters and their mother dressed up for church, and they would say things like, "You look wonderful," to the members of their family. And so it does have an effect on people. I always feel sorry for maybe the elderly men in this day and age when young women aren't wearing very pretty clothes, or they're wearing things that just aren't very flattering to them, or that just shows more flesh than fabric. And fabric is the big deal with me because I'm a sewist and I have a vast collection of fabric which I am vowing to use up before I die. And so I want to go back to this appearance thing. So speaking can be stifled, but your appearance cannot. Unless, of course, someone is insisting that you just put a certain sack over yourself, maybe painter's cloth or something, and walk around in that, hiding everything. But even then, you can fix your hair and you can fix your face if you feel like that you have to wear a sack. But this is a wonderful tool. This appearance preparation is a wonderful tool, and it's a door to your life message. So you may never open your mouth, and people are not interested in what you have to say or interested in what you think, but your appearance will send a message. And I've heard often from women that they feel invisible. Have you ever heard that? I've heard that. I don't know where that's coming from. Maybe I just haven't grown to that point, but I do hear women say, well, I just, of course, when I'm in town or when I'm even in the home, I feel invisible. Now, I don't feel that way, but that might have something to do with something that's working on your mind and making you feel left out or sidelined or not in any way valuable. So, but I'm not sure. But I've heard that word, invisible. I just feel like I'm invisible. Well, maybe you were saying something and no one noted it, or their minds were so full of what they were going to say they just didn't hear what you said and made you feel invisible. I have never felt invisible, although I have wanted to be sometimes. And so, I mean, I've often wished I were invisible so I could get some things done, or I could attend something without anyone noticing me and wanting to know everything about me and everything about my family, because, I'm a preacher's wife, and that's the way it's been for all these years, almost 50 years, I couldn't go anywhere with somebody being extremely curious about my family. And they wanted they really are looking for, a lot of people are just looking for something that you failed in, or that they could judge that you failed in, so they could say, ah, you know, this way of life of hers, it didn't turn out too well. And some people are extremely interested in how wealthy I am, and of course are very disappointed when they see the manse and the little you know, the little rooms that I exist in, and what I do with it. I don't have impressive furnishing, but I have, you know, a mix of things. But they are insatiably curious about some people who are more maybe in the public eye. And I do wish that I were invisible sometimes, but I am curious. Have you ever felt that you were invisible, and where does that feeling come from, and what is the signal to that? I don't know what that is. I've heard several women say that to me personally. So your dress, the way you dress, I think has a lot to do with, now see, I don't know about this invisible thing, but if you feel invisible, you could change the way your appearance. Maybe you can't change your clothing, but you could change just getting a more refreshed look and not looking old and tired and feeling backgroundish, you know. I don't know if that's a new word for me. And in the public place, but practice in the home. The home is great practice for everything, and it gives you confidence. Doing things at home gives you confidence. If you do it enough, then you feel confident doing it. It's like learning to play the piano. If, like Elizabeth Bennet said, I probably could, she said, I could have played better had I practiced more. And it's the same with anything that you feel uncomfortable with, whether it's being hospitable in your own home, serving tea, or dressing. If you'll practice it in your own home, you become quite comfortable with it. How many of you are used to just laying around in t-shirt and jeans and tennis shoes, and then you're required to dress up and you feel odd, you feel uncomfortable? And so you have to go out somewhere and you feel dressed up and you feel very conspicuous and self-conscious, and you'll see other women walking around in beautiful skirts and dresses, and they just nonchalant and they feel pretty confident. Well, if you practice it at home, if you'll dress up at home, which is really the most important place, and I think some of you are finding that out now that you're home, then you feel more confident when you have to go out wearing things that aren't so casual. So I've spent quite a bit of time on the appearance thing, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that. Also, here's another question you might want to consider, is that you need to avoid, no matter how young or old you are, you need to avoid looking clownish or trendy, but instead opt for refined and elegant and appropriate. Now, one of the things that I found valuable was looking at the old paintings, and I have included quite a bit of these on my older blog posts that are just posts and not videos. But I had a post called Painting Inspired Sewing, and I put a painting on, and then I bought fabric that looked like what was in the painting of the woman of the 1800s, and made a dress that was less, took out the fullness, made it more modern. You know, royalty, because they have to do so many public appearances, and they visit nursing homes, they visit schools, and they visit things that are in and out of cars. Their clothing can't be all, you know, floppy and full, and it has to be close to the body and modest, because you're going to be leaning over and kneeling down, and so their clothing has to be very modest, and they have to, but yet they still have to have clothing that is very, very classic. And that's why I say painting inspired clothing is a great idea, because you can look at the color, you can look at the style, and you can just adapt it to your lifestyle. One of the reasons we can't wear these big billowy clothes, but we still can follow the style and the shape and the principle of it all, is because of the vehicle. Our vehicles are small, we're going to be getting in and out quite quickly, and we can't have clothing that isn't smooth and easy to get in and out. And also in the home. Our homes are generally smaller. I mean, I don't know, but generally I think our homes are pretty small today, and we have to be able to fit in them. And so that's just one of my things about adapting what I would call is painting inspired clothing. You can still follow the same guidelines. And so what I mean when I say avoid looking clownish or trendy. Now, some of you who are very young, you can get away with a very trendy style and you can still look awfully cute because you have youth on your side and you have the fresh bloom of youth and you don't have all the things that assail the elderly, like sagging skin or wrinkles or lack of color in your face or shiny hair and a youthful, firm figure. And so you could wear a potato sack and you would just look as cute as a button, wouldn't you? Because you are the person, you look smooth and healthy and young. And but and so you could wear some clown outfit and still look absolutely wonderful. But some of you older people, you have the question, I want to look younger. Okay, let's say I want to look younger. Wouldn't it make sense to wear what the younger people are wearing and then I would look younger? No, it doesn't work that way. The only reason they look younger is not because of the trendy clothes, not because of the trendy hairstyle or the trendy makeup. It's because they are young, their skin is young, their bodies are held in a different way, they're young, and that will hold up any style. If you're older, you cannot wear a trendy style. You cannot wear a trendy haircut and look younger just because that is a younger style. It doesn't work that way. For some reason, some of these more edgy styles and colors and hairstyles and makeup somehow on an older person just makes your age more exaggerated, in my opinion. And so I have noticed this. That's why you must, I think even as a young person, be attracted to things that are refined and elegant and appropriate and beautiful. So study the old paintings. I will put some of them on this post if I can find them. They are on previous posts. And I'm not talking about the classic paintings. I'm talking about paintings that you feel are very classy. Because classic is not always good. I discussed that previously. So be careful as an older person not to be too trendy. Sometimes the way that hair is cut and the way that clothing is cut and just the cut of everything does not flatter an older figure or an older face. And I'm not saying that I know all the answers to this because I'm not a hairdresser and I'm not a cosmetician and I don't know all of it, but I do know one thing. If I started following trendy, youthful things that are made to attract the youth and for them to wear it, I would not look young. I would look twice as old. So that is just my little lecture on that. If you want to have confidence, then dress in a way that is that has a feeling of royalty. And I've had several videos where I've talked about royalty and how we're a royal priesthood and we are the royals. We're the stars. You know, the Bible says the righteous shall shine as the stars. Well, you know, righteous just means someone who believes in God. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just the most perfect person. And but it just means that because of your belief, your expression and the way you dress and the way you act is going to shine. I'm sure there's a much deeper meaning about it, but that's just for now. And so if you have, if I hope you're working, I hope you're getting something done. And so I want to talk a little bit, we're going to switch over now about homemaking. So we want to go into housekeeping, homemaking, and talk a little bit about more of an attitude to the homemaking. All of us have had days when we've gotten up in the morning and we we're discouraged the minute we open our eyes. I'm sure you've all felt like that. Discouraged the minute you open your eyes. And have felt that, felt the need, as I have, as Dr. Gibson said, felt the need of going back to bed and starting over, just like groundhogs, you know. They're supposed to come out and they don't like the weather, so they go back. And so that's why it's so important to say, well, the first thing I'll do is get dressed and get myself ready. And then you notice as you work with yourself, get dressed, you look at yourself in the mirror, you fix your hair, somehow your mind gets more organized and you settle down a little bit, and then you're thinking while you're in the bathroom that I think the first thing I need to do is go into the kitchen and do such and such, and you make a little mental plan. I always think that having a list is very good, but the list cannot run your life. But like, I have such great plans today because tomorrow someone is probably going to drop by, and I'd like to be prepared for that. But at the same time, it's Sunday and it's also church. We have never stopped church since this whole world thing began. We decided not to quit having church, and so all of our members kept coming, and so now we have a singing coming up, and then preparing for that and getting the building cleaned up and just getting everything ready, making sure that the songbooks are evenly dispersed so that everyone has one, and then all the things I had to do. I had to take a plant over there and then get my house ready, because usually someone follows me home and wants to have a cup of tea. So my mind is, I've got a list going, but I'm also wanting to be sure that I get all that done and get my house ready in case someone comes over. Now the home should be as pleasant as possible, and I realize the messes we make, it's not always pleasant, but it shouldn't turn you into a screeching maniac just because there's a mess. I know that there are people that have such large families, they get a little bit behind, or there's another activity they have to go to, and they end up stacking the dirty dishes on the floor while the dishwasher runs its first round, or while they get ready to do something else that they have to do. That happens once in a while, but it shouldn't throw you into a tizzy and make you into a grouchy old person. And the home should be something that everyone wants to come to rather than want to get away from. And if you feel like that is something that you want to get away from, then what you need to do is create it in a way that you want to be in. And what I did was, years ago, I observed why I liked other places, what I liked about other places that I visited or toured or we went to, or what did I like about it. And I would start to analyze this, keep a little notebook in my purse and list things that I liked. And even nowadays, you know, I'll still take pictures of something in an antique store if I'm allowed, and think, you know, I'd like to have something like that. And I like the arrangement. I like the corner they made. And then I started reproducing it in my own home. And to me, it was light. It was plenty of light. It was cheerfulness. It was also scents and smells. And it was basically based on the 5 senses. And it was color. And I'm very visual. I like color, and I like a lot of light too. So I don't mind I don't mind the shabby chic. We invented the shabby chic back in the 1950s because we just painted everything white when it needed a new look. And we're the inventors of it. It was nothing new, and I like it. But there are just different things you need to observe if you're going to be home. And it's like Mr. S said, you're going to be home more than I am. You're going to be looking at all this stuff, all the 4 walls, then you might as well have them the color you want them. You might as well have it as you like it. And so make it as pleasant as possible because you're going to have to be there. I realize we all like to get out, and I do too. But nowadays I go out, it's because I want to improve my home. I want to go out and get something that I need for my home, or to the food that needs to be cooked. I'm doing it all for the home. When you look at enterprise and when you look at the commercial world, So much of it is for the home. You look at your hardware store, lots of door handles and knobs for your dressers and lights for your living room. And you look at your any kind of a shop or a store, it's all designed to use it at home, isn't it? And not much of it, the industrial products are found in a different area, and the main enterprise on Main Street are things that you would use at home. And so when you look at it, it's all about the home, isn't it? You get onto some of these sites online and you can find so many things. It's all about the home. That's how the world runs, isn't it? Now I want to go on in a little bit to a few things that we need to talk about the home. First of all, cleanliness is important, and if you don't care about decorating, at least care about cleaning, because that is in a way very decorative. It just has a sparkle in a home. Your windows, I know people like to joke that they don't do windows, but when they made windows where you could actually reach them and clean them, it wasn't a big problem, and it was the job you gave to one of the younger people in the family, one of the children, because they could see instant results and they liked cleaning the little window panes. And so, but when you see a sparkle, like today I noticed while I was fixing myself up to come here for you, I noticed that the mirrors had, needed to be cleaned. So that'll be something that I will do. There's just nothing like sparkling mirrors and sparkling windows. I also think mirrors are important in a home because if you have a small home, it's nice to look at to see a mirror reflect another part of the house, and it seems to be bigger, and it seems to be another room. And so these are some of the things that I have found about the home that I thought that I would share with you. And I wanted to tell you also, as far as the home is concerned, to develop an interest beyond housekeeping and house cleaning. If you have an interest that you can develop, that the trouble with most of us is that we make some of our interests into work. We think, this is so nice, this is so interesting, let's do it 10 times as much, or let's make, maybe you learn to make a little card with rubber stamps or the cry cut machine, and this is nice, let's make 100 of them, and next thing you know, it's a job, and you start to feel that tension that comes from an unfinished project. But my suggestion is, and this is just my observation, not everything's going to work with you. Maybe you don't need an interest. But if you have an interest, like I have a list of everything I want to do outdoors and everything I want to do indoors, and I have an outdoor interest. Now, some of you going into the autumn months in the southern hemisphere will have a vacation from your outdoor interests if you're living in an especially cold area. But you can still sweep the porch and have a look at everything, make sure that clutter doesn't occur in your own garden. And I heard somebody say the other day, if you call it a yard, it'll never be a garden. And that's so interesting, isn't it? Because the front garden of a cottage was an extension of the house. It was another room that they could go out in and sit in. And I like that concept very much. So I'm going to quit calling it a yard and calling it the garden. And gardens had a different definition in the olden days. They were places you would walk and sit down and not necessarily grow crops. Now it's called a garden and we're growing crops out there. But there are several kinds. We have our flower gardens and we have our vegetable gardens, and we have our just touring, walking around gardens, and you can have all that in your own area, in your own home, actually outside of your own house, just very slightly, even the smallest area. We went to speaking of interests, years ago when people had newspapers, we saw in a paper an advertisement, and for, I guess it was $10, we could go tour this garden, and several houses in a neighborhood had opened their gates between them and created a walkway and a garden between them, and it was just beautiful, full of fountains and benches and bird baths and different colors and flowers and mounds of things and grasses, and then in the end you could go to someone's house and they had refreshments. And I remember thinking, I should translate this to my own area. And these were just small backyards. They weren't big, but when you had gone on your little tour through them, some of them had a little roundabout, walkway, and you got out of those three homes backyard gardens, thinking that they were bigger than they were. They somehow managed through all those plants and little paths to make you feel that you were in a very big area. And so we can do that, and that's an interest, but make sure your interest doesn't turn into such a labor that you're exhausted and you start to hate it. And it could be anything. It could be your sewing, it could be your decorating, and just remember that the most important things are the cleanliness and the neatness and the orderliness. And then when that has been accomplished, you can add some other interest to it. And also to make the home a place where you would rather be. And I have noticed for myself that the more that I bring things that I enjoy into my home, like reading materials or, like these flowers, that I don't get that restless feeling of having to go, quote, somewhere else, although I believe that getting out is very important. So it's really important to develop a worthwhile interest, or something that just relaxes you, and give your home and yourself, as the homemaker, a sense of purpose, a sense of worthwhile endeavor. So creatively do something that you love. I think that's so important. And if you're happy without that, that's fine too. Now I want to talk a little bit about conversation skills. I still am working on that. I often fail, but I think that sometimes there are people that are just waiting to trip you up, even if you have a broad experience in conversation, that it wouldn't take much for someone to object. You've got these objection people. They love to contradict and they love to object. And one thing you can do to cut down on that is, in some circles, in some social circles, you don't have to get into deep conversations about things. You don't have to express a political opinion. You don't have to express a health opinion. I know people are real sensitive to that. If you'll say, I drink lemon juice with honey and it just makes me feel good. To them, that's a medical opinion, and I have no right to say it. Even when I was reading Martha Green's book yesterday about in the last video, where she had home health remedies, some people are very militantly against that. So you just start to be aware of things that you can't talk about. And there are some people that don't even like you to talk about the weather. They're going to argue anyway. And it's the expert from afar that you have to always be aware of, because these experts that they're listening to on TV or on the web makes you nullified. And that could be why some people say they feel invisible, because they can't seem to get on a smooth road of conversation with anyone, because these people are so quarrelsome and so argumentative and such know-it-alls. But one thing that we can solve is that some conversation doesn't have to be serious. It can be just checking on each other and just checking to see, are you doing all right? Would you like another cup of tea? Keep it on a very surface, I guess you would say shallow, but yet as a Christian, we all just have a heart for people. We just want them to be comfortable and fill their teacup and make them relaxed and happy and encourage them. And that's all that needs to be done. We don't have to talk about deep subjects with people that can't be trusted to be polite in the conversation. So I would say keep it very, very simple. And I want to refute something. You know, I've talked about classics, on how people just think classics, you know, have a classical education for your children, and admire the classics. Not all the classics are sound wisdom. And I heard a quote the other day by someone, someone quoted Eleanor Roosevelt, and she apparently said, great minds talk about ideas, average minds talk about things, and small minds talk about people. And I got to thinking about that, because I had heard that before in, you know, you listen to sales meetings or even sermons, and somebody will quote that. And I got to thinking about it and decided that it wasn't true. And knowing about Eleanor Roosevelt and what she stood for, and that she was probably not in line with everything that I believe, I began to question it. Because, you know, in the New Testament, Christ was all about people, wasn't he? And he did talk about people. And he talked about trying to put them in the right direction, and he criticized Pharisees, and he praised Simon Bar-Jonah, who he said, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And he praised people who believed, and without having to have a huge amount of evidence. And he also talked about people who were not believers, or people and their thoughts. And of course that was Christ, and we're not Christ. But then you go on to the apostles, and the Apostle Paul, who wrote prolifically in the New Testament, was concerned about people. In Our Lady's Bible classes, going through 1st and 2nd Timothy, which was his instructions to a young preacher. He was telling how to get along with people in a church, how to refine your conversation so that you're not quarreling over words and strifes, and how to handle people, and how to keep them built up, and how to work for the Lord, and how to make progress in your life. And yes, of course, that's talking about ideas and things too, but I don't know if I like that at all, that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, and I won't even quote it to you again, but I've decided to reject it. I don't like it, and it doesn't seem to jive with the Bible and the New Testament especially. So that is something they use a lot in sales meetings, and I've heard preachers say it. It always makes me cringe when a preacher will quote something from a famous person, even a president, and not really see if it has really good solid backing in the scripture. But of course they use this. The Apostle Paul used some of their quotes from some of their books and philosophers in order to reach the people around them and make comparisons. I understand that, but I think we need to be careful not to swallow everything just because it's, quote, classic. And so that's just my opinion. And so I think that you also have to develop a talent for talking about when you have a good friend and you can trust that they are on board with your beliefs, then you can get into deeper conversation. It used to frustrate me as a teenager, because teenagers like to talk about the meaning of life, and they like to have a little more depth in discussion, and that challenges their intellect and their creativity. And so they are sometimes frustrated by small talk, where you spend a lot of time just listening to somebody drone on about some little thing that has no bearing on anything. But as I've gotten older, I realize that some small talk is necessary, because if you get too intense, you can be too intense for a lot of people, and they're not edified by it, and also create some controversy with people who object to it, or who don't like it. And so I think small talk is really, really good. And if you only know those people you have to really test things out. And when I say test things out, somebody may appear to be just like you, the way they sound, the things they say, but you've got to test it out. You've got to wait a while and see. And the minute you hit a sour note with them in a conversation, then you just stop. And you go back to the more surface things, like well, how's the weather at your house, or how's, would you like, how is the trip here, or what kind of such and such do you like, if they happen to be gardeners or something, and just develop. Royalty has to go through that, don't they? They have to develop this the skill of small talk that doesn't really matter to, I don't think, their own intellect personally, but is so meaningful to the person that they're talking to. So I want to read something that a lot of people kind of overlook, and I've seen this on ladies' homemaking sites, and they just love this scripture, but they miss a couple of things in it. So I just want to see if you can pick them up, okay? And it can apply to what I talked to you about in the beginning about your appearance, all right? And it's from Romans 12. And I noticed that people have been reading Romans 12. It's all about how to get along with people, I believe. But the first paragraph is so interesting, and there are some words and things that people haven't quite picked up on. I hardly ever see anyone elaborate on it. So it's the first two verses. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay, I've seen homemakers, they get all excited about this, and they love the idea of transforming their mind, or not being conformed to the world, and to present their bodies a living sacrifice. That's all about, modesties, how we carry ourselves, how we present ourselves, and not being conformed to the world and its styles, and how important the renewal of the mind is. But look at these words here that I rarely hear anyone speak of. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Okay, they've got that. That by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay, when we test out the classics, the classic literature, we test it out according to a standard. And mentally, you probably have a standard of decency, or a standard of attitude and mood, and what some of this reading material will do to you or your children. You have a standard. I've said you can use any number of things as a standard, and one of them could be Philippians 4:8. Seems rather simplistic, but it is still a very good standard. Whatever's good, lovely, pure, just, of good report, and noble, and if there be any praise, if it's praiseworthy, think on these things. And we judge our literature by that. And I mean, as homemakers and Christians and homeschoolers. And so this little verse here, some people are just missing this last part. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. Now, discern is to make a judgment, to make a decision between good and bad, right and wrong, light and dark. So testing and discerning. Check that out. How do you test something out? You test, it's like these conversations with people. You might say, I want to go a little deeper in this conversation. I'm going to just test it a little bit, and I'll say something about, maybe squeezing a lemon and drinking the lemon juice with honey, and feeling better, and how it's done my skin so much good. I'll just throw that out there. And if they jump on that and criticize it, then I'll back off. I won't go any further with the home health thing. And so I'll test it. The other thing is to discern, meaning to have good judgment. If the person that you're visiting with has been argumentative before, have good judgment about that. Be careful of your words and of your choice of subjects, and notice that if you notice that this person objects to everything you say and contradicts everything you say, sometimes, like I said before, they don't realize that they're arguing. They think that's the way you make conversation, is to say the opposite of what you said, because they think that's stimulating. They're not really mean. Some people are not really mean, but other people have just got it so embedded in their personality that they're grumpy, and that's what they do. That is what they do. They just And if you're uncomfortable with that, now some people don't mind. They don't mind bantering back and forth. I've seen whole tea parties ruined by someone who thought it was funny just to argue back and forth uh, with each other. They just amused by it. But it makes me very uncomfortable. I don't like it. So when someone objects to something that I say, and of course their favorite phrases are, well, not all the time, well, not everything, or it remains to be seen, or, well, good luck with that one. And they're they're not particularly designing to discourage you. That's just the way they are, and they don't realize it. And of course, our principle here on this blog is to build people up, and they get a lot of it from the world. You know, you listen to the media so much after a while, and they're going to come and argue about everything. And so I test it. So you test something out, and you do it quite gingerly, meaning carefully, and not throw yourself into a conversation or introduce a subject or even comment on something they have commented on. If you sense, if you discern, that means judge. If you can size it up, if you can conclude or deduct where they're going to go with it, you can save yourself a lot of agony in the home by being careful. And one of the things I suggested that you do is watch some of the old Mama's Family Carol Burnett comedy shows, because they had it down in a script. In fact, you used to be able to buy the script, a copy of the script, and put on your own little dramas, and people have done that in community efforts, and they're a lot of fun. But they have got this so itemized and listed as how someone starts out innocently saying something and someone grabs a hold of it, or someone says something that is demeaning and someone else objects to it and it triggers them, and you can go through some of these and see. Of course, it's all designed for us to see the comedy in it so that we can see how foolish we are. And when we had real comedy, we could see the foolishness of it. In fact, the Apostle Paul was upset with some of the church members in one city that he went to, and he said, well, you're all kings, aren't you? And he was being sarcastic because of the conceited way in which they were acting. And he said, I wish that I was a king too, and then we could just all reign together. But some people will read that and totally misunderstand it. But it was done in a sarcastic way to bring the point out. And so when you watch some of these old shows that were true comedy, now I wouldn't suggest that you watch them with children until you have previewed them, because there might be something objectionable in them. And they were done, I don't know, they were done in the 1960s, I'm not sure, or 70s. Anyway, that is particularly what I wanted to say, was that this can give you a greater insight into how people act. And since we don't have so much real comedy anymore, it's hard for us to see ourselves. It's hard for us to see how people act, and there's no way of, see, discerning and testing is like comparing to a standard. You have to have a standard. And so when you're watching something like this, you'll say, now, was that right? Was that lovely? Was that truthful? Was that, and was that helpful? Was it edifying? Was it, and you can see how this family conversation would decline into total, it would just erupt into a total meltdown because someone was goading somebody else, and the other person took the bait, and off they went. And then the other person wasn't helping either, and then the person that was trying to arbitrate it all was making it worse. And so you just watch this, and then you can teach a lot easier your children as to where did they go wrong. You might find one that's appropriate enough for teenage children, and to be able to analyze it and stop the film and say, okay, now what happened here, and go on, and that way they can improve their social skills in the home. And like I said before, everything is practiced in the home. And if you want good social skills, and you want your children to have good social skills, you need to practice them in the home. Now, it's possible you are alone, but you have your text and your cell, and actually we're better off with these things because they are so sensitive that they can get the wrong idea just by a simple text. Someone can just go off and get the wrong idea, and it makes you more careful. It makes you think how to couch this word or this a message politely. And do you remember that Bella, I believe, was talking to John Rokesmith in Our Mutual Friend, and which is one of those old crazy novels written by, I believe, was it Charles Dickens? Not that he's a favorite of mine, but I really enjoyed Our Mutual Friend. And Bella said to John, do you think that so-and-so was a fine person? And she said, you understand, I'm not setting up an opinion. And so what she was doing was trying to soften her comment by saying, I am not an expert at this, and I'm not trying to set up my opinion as the only opinion. She said, you understand, I'm not setting up an opinion. And so I thought that was very interesting. So when you're texting or when you're talking on the phone, sometimes you have to couch your words in something a little softer so that it doesn't come across as, you can see, sometimes I'll text someone and I'll think, oh no, I know where that's going to go, because immediately the mind will go in a certain direction. Well, this is what some of these comedies were all about, knowing this. So, and it's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. It's not like this world is just, when I was growing up, back in the olden days, I heard adults say things like, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Can you imagine growing up and a little girl thinking, oh my goodness, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. This is a terrible place, and you're trapped. You're there, And then later on I learned, especially through homeschooling, you learn that there's a purpose for you being here, and it's wonderful, and it's delightful, and that everything has a purpose and a reason, and it's glorious. And so you learn to discern and you learn to test. And that's what was at the end of this chapter, this little verse here, that everybody's got all excited about presenting their bodies as a living sacrifice and not being conformed to the world and being transformed by the renewal of their minds. Now, I understand that's a big study in itself. It could take a long time to really analyze that. But that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And by testing, and you have to test and discern, meaning judge, against some standard, like I mentioned, Philippians 4:8, but there are plenty of other scriptures too that you could use. And so test against, whether it's good, whether it's just, whether it's lovely, whether it's true, and whether it's worthwhile as well, and what kind of mood that it puts you and your children in. So test everything. Test your friendships, test your conversation skills, test your classical literature, classical this, classical that. Now today, to end, I'd like to read from the Old World History and Geography. As you can see, I only have the teacher edition. I cannot find the student edition. This was one of those books that I often had to remove from their chest at night while they were sleeping, because they had gone to bed reading it like it was a story. And you don't find many textbooks like that. And it's an Abeka book, and I would like to read the beginning of it, and it's called The Fertile Crescent, Cradle of Civilization. Now, what does this have to do with you and homemaking? Well, first of all, it's really important that you have another interest, and this is one of my interests. I like to read about the olden days, and it blesses me today, and a knowledge of why we're here and why the world is the way it is, and what your purpose is, can be found in some of these books, this Old World History and Geography. And I liked this chapter the very best. So I'm going to read this to you before I say goodbye. The Fertile Crescent, Cradle of Civilization. Part 1, History is a Story. History is the written record of mankind. It is a story, a true story of what man has done with the time God has given him. Some have said history is his story. And just look at the way it's spelled. Like all good stories, history has a beginning, a middle, and an end. What it tells us about the beginning helps us to understand why the middle is the way it is and what the end will be. Understanding the beginning helps us to understand where all the different people of the earth came from. And throughout this book, they will have drawings and a chart of different people of the earth. It's absolutely fascinating. And the New World History and Geography shows all the different tribes of people in North and South America, names them all. It's just fantastic. And understanding the beginning helps us to understand where the different people of the earth came from, why people speak different languages. Have you ever thought, well, why is it that I was born in the English world speaking English? Well, there's a purpose for it. And why bad things happen as well as good things. That is also explained in one of the other books that I had for homeschooling, was that God gave you your language, the language that you have. God gave you because you can praise him with it, and you can also influence others with it. You can spread the gospel with it. It's just that simple. The land of beginnings. To begin the story of history, we must go back in time to the creation of man in the Garden of Eden. We must go to an area of the earth called the Fertile Crescent, and they have a map here. A long curved strip of land known for its rich soil and historic past. The combination of its rich fertile soil and its crescent shape like the moon gave the area its name, the Fertile Crescent. Because Earth's earliest men lived in the Fertile Crescent, it is often called the cradle of civilization. Two rivers in the Fertile Crescent have been known to man since history began. They are the Tigris and the Euphrates. These rivers began high up in the northern mountains where melting snows flow down the mountains in streams. The name Tigris means arrow. It runs a straight course just as the arrow does when it's sent from a bow. Euphrates means that which makes fruitful. This winding river did the biggest job of the two in helping to bring water to the thirsty land around it. So I just wanted to bring that out to you today. I could read more to you maybe from it later. So until then, I hope you got a lot done today and you didn't just sit here and watch. So ladies, God bless you, and I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.